Welcome to Discovering. Brian is back with a new story tonight.
Typically when you put deer and mushrooms together, they're sauteing in a pan at camp and deer season. I'm hanging out with Mushroom Matt from Shiitake Creek Mushroom Company to get the scoop on mushroom food plots.
Plus, I go back to the Sioux to catch Atlantic salmon, this time hooked to the Cloverland Hydroelectric Plant. So sit back and relax. It's Monday night and it's time for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forests thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill. The eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
Welcome to Myco Habitat. You guys know me from Shiitake Creek Mushroom Company. Now I study deer and mushrooms. Several years ago, I incepted mushroom food plot solutions for whitetail hunters. Today, we're going to talk all about it. So, what we have here is the wine cap mushroom, or King Stropharia, or about 8,300 different names. And mushroom farmers, we call this SRA, Stropharia rugosa annulata, which is a Latin, which means King's Crown Annulus. We'll get to that when we do our identification in just one moment. As you can see though, the deer have been in here eating it. And I can tell that they have because they leave evidence, right? They bite them off. So as they eat this, pieces of it will fall out. And there's one really nice one that's not been eaten by anything but maybe a chipmunk so far. We call this Stropharia rugosa annulata, or King's Crown, because that annulus, or ring, looks like a crown. Oftentimes they can be white gilled as they first start out, turning charcoal brown later on, even purple. But the most noticeable characteristic is going to be this annulus, or ring, and then also at the stipe or the stem, it will have hairs or rootlets that grow from it. And these are definite sign that you have the correct mushroom that we planted in here. And so what happens is deer comes along, eats that part, and leaves this. This is stringy, and they don't really like it as much. Other wildlife, like grouse and turkeys, will come in here and consume this either for the bug value or just for the mushrooms, and they do eat the other mushroom. Pretty much you name it. If it's walking around out here like a bear, it's going to eat this. There's literature dating back to the 1880s that indicates deer not only like mushrooms, but they're a preferred food source when they're available in the landscape. For whatever reason, it was just glossed over, mostly because deer scientists are not mycologists. And until the field of mycology began a rapid expansion in the last decade in particular, it hasn't really had its place among microbiologists. Now that mushrooms are having their moment, we're really re-looking at a whole bunch of different things. So mushrooms are comprised of chitin or chitin. And this chitin or chitin is full of protein, and in particular phosphorus. It's a very water-soluble phosphorus, and it's easily digested. All chitin is easily digested by ruminants. So that phosphorus that they're consuming replaces the skeletal phosphorus that a deer removes from its body to support lactation and antler growth. A study that came out in the last few years suggests that ergothioneine, which is a novel compound that's an amino acid found in mushrooms, is found in the velvet and in the blood during antler growth, but not in the body blood of bucks. This is their bread and butter. This is what they eat wherever possible, whenever they encounter it. So what we're doing here is growing one of their favorite mushrooms in a spot where we can hunt it. And through the use of irrigation, if we have access, we can control when it happens and be ready for opening day. So several years ago, we filmed here when we made these mushroom food plots. And now it's been a number of years, and we're gonna peel back the layer and see what's left over, right? And as you can see, organic decomposition is very much occurring here. And as we dig down to the native soil level, you can see that it's nice and dark, whereas before it was sugar sand. Inside of here, we have dynamic life like earthworms, ants, and other organisms which constitute the basis of a soil food web. So even though we're in pines, which historically have little to nothing to offer for wildlife, we're offering a tremendous amount of food in a spot that otherwise is quote unquote junk for a landowner with regards to hunting. Other than cultivating mushrooms specifically for deer, we can go afield and look for wild mushrooms that the deer like on public land or on your private land during deer season. And most of these are gonna happen again and again and again for many years. So getting to know them as a landowner or a public hunting enthusiast who likes that spot is pretty important to us. Now the honey mushroom often grows in large clumps and clusters. This time there's only 2 in this one, but we can definitely tell. There are a number of different ways to identify this. Number one, it has a ring. There are ringless honey mushrooms. Those generally occur later in the year. It's got that nice honey colored cap. And then also we see the striations and the coloring on the stipe or the stem here. The gills, white to creamy yellow, and they have a distinct pattern where short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. It's very easy to identify this mushroom. Has a nice pleasant smell. One of the things we're looking for in particular as humans to eat it is that there's no bugs filled up in the cap or in the stem, which usually in the early autumn like this there would be, and you can see that's kind of buggy in there. So we wouldn't necessarily want to eat this for ourselves, but many people would just do this and keep the cap and eat it. The deer absolutely crush this mushroom. This mushroom has a litany of names. One of the most popular is the stump mushroom because it grows on the dead roots of trees, or in this case, we're growing it on sawdust specifically. But it grows from the dead roots of trees and any trees that are tipped over and have ground contact. And it can actually kill the tree and does. It wraps what is known as a rhizomorph, which is like a black strand around the roots and the base of the tree and girdles them and strangles it until that tree has root rot and falls over, and then it eats it. This has been going on for many, many years. And of course, the honey mushroom is the site of is of course the world's largest contiguous living organism. That's in Crystal Falls, Michigan, site of the Humongous Fungus Festival. And that is several hundred acres and counting. They're still testing, and every time they do, it gets bigger and bigger. Now, generally these guys will appear 1 to 3 times, even 4 in some years, but usually 1 to 3 times. So what we have here is what I call false fruiting, which is it splashed just a couple mushrooms a few weeks before it normally would, and that's because of the climactic conditions that made it happen. And a few weeks after a nice, warm, dry period, followed by a cool, rainy period, which is nature's trigger for mushrooms, after a few days, you'll be able to see honey mushrooms in the landscape more than likely. And likely a few weeks after that, when the same autumn dryness and then wetness with the rains comes through. Now, just because it's raining, you don't run outside and automatically look for mushrooms thinking they're gonna pop up instantly. It takes many days for them to emerge. So as they begin to emerge under perfect climatic conditions, they can triple or even more in size every day. So it takes quite a few days for it to grow to this size. So you generally have, from the time it rains, a few days before you begin to see emergence in small mushrooms. When it's raining though, it's easier to find mushrooms because all the leaves in the woods lay down and all the brush kind of lays down too from the rain. And the mushrooms' colors stand out more. They kind of glow from the rain. So while it's raining is actually a spectacular time to go look for mushrooms, or immediately following the rain. Just know that it takes a week or so from the time it rains till you're usually picking those mushrooms, depending on the variety. However, if it rained 3, 4, 5 days ago and it's raining again today, that's whenever I'd go look for mushrooms. All right, guys, so a few weeks ago, a couple months ago now, about 60 days ago, we made this mushroom food plot, and we're checking the health of it now to see if it's ready to go. So what we're gonna do is gonna pull back the top layer of sawdust, and we can already see beautiful white mycelium vigorously growing here. I'm just gonna push my hand down, get a nice chunk of it. So the white threads we see are like a subway system. They're not threads at all, they're actually hollow tubes. And so it's shuttling nutrients in a big complex maze, and then it's breaking down this lignin and cellulose and redistributing the trace elements into the landscape in exchange for sugars for plants. And then of course the byproduct is mushrooms. Beautiful soil in the end too, of course. So this one is doing great. And I can kind of feel how hard and spongy it is, right? So I know that this one probably going to be ready this year for hunting season. And it's going to continue to produce mushrooms for the next 3 to 5 years without me adding new materials. If I every other year or every year decide to add new sawdust to this, I can keep it going for many, many years to come without having to add more spawn. I can also make it larger. And that's what we're gonna do here today, is we're gonna expand this. We're gonna add another 10 feet by 5 feet onto the end of it. So to get this mycelium onto this, we're gonna have to do some work. First, we're gonna need some basic stuff. A tape measure, a rake, a lawnmower optionally, some straw, and some wood chips. And that's it. It's gonna take us about 20 minutes to make another 5 by 10 or 50 square feet for one bag of spawn right here. And it should happen fast enough that we'll see results from it still this hunting season. So before we put the mycelium down, we need to expose the bare earth. We hit it with the mower to get rid of the unwanted vegetation, but we actually need soil contact to this mycelium for it to work right. And what it will do is work with the bacteria and native fungi and the mycorrhizae that are already present here to shuttle all the nutrients that it needs, and it will improve the browse quality of the surrounding vegetation in the process. In this bare earth, there's a whole host of bacterial life and native mycorrhizal fungi that already colonized this ground that are gonna work with this to give it everything that it needs, and it's gonna exchange everything that it produces from breaking down this material for what it needs. We've got to soak our straw. If we start with wet ingredients when we make a mushroom food plot, we'll have great success. We're gonna put this inside this tank for 12 to 24 hours to soak. And then you're going to drain it. Or if you can't drain it, or you don't want to because you want to do another one, take half of it at a time and put it inside a wheelbarrow. So drain a little water out of this so it's easier to move. All right, so we're gonna dump about half the straw on the ground. We're gonna take our bag of spawn. We're gonna do the first step, which is break it up until we get it back to sawdust, because that's what it is, just sawdust with mycelium growing on it. And then once we've got it back up into, let's say ping pong ball sizes or smaller, and in particular nice floofy sawdust like stuff, we're gonna create 3 layers, 25% of the bag, 25%, then the remaining half. We're gonna take approximately 25% of this beautiful spawn, and we're just gonna crumble the first layer down on the ground, just like this, across the whole thing. Now that we've got our first level of spawn down, we're gonna drop half of our straw bale that we soaked over the ground. So we're gonna break up this whole first half of the bale and then put another level of spawn down. Putting a small level out, the next time we spread, after the rest of the straw is used, we're gonna use everything left in the bag. Just like before, we're gonna add another level of straw. All right, now that we've got the rest of our straw down, it's time to come in with the last of our mycelium. A quick little tamp with the back side of our rake to make sure that we knock all the air pockets out of this and get all that straw laying down flat. We're just gonna cover it with 3 to 6 inches of sawdust. But there are a few rules. Number 1, no pine, no cedar, no spruce, fir, stuff like that. And if there is some, we want to keep it to about
10%, a quarter at the very top end, but let's keep it under 10. There's a reason we build with those woods, and that's because they're rot resistant. Mushrooms are in fact rot. So we want to put food out for the mushrooms that they can eat. Avoid giant pieces of wood chips if at all possible, and avoid very fine sawdust because it tends to cake and repel water. All that being said, soft hardwoods like maple, red maple, sugar maple, popple, aspens, those are the very best, but almost every hardwood is going to work just fine. What we want to do is 1 bag of spawn, 1 bale of straw, and 1 yard of wood chips. A level truckload is 2 yards of wood chips. So we're going to unload half this truck and call it good. That's it, guys. 3 to 5 years of deer food in a half hour. Costs less than $80. Add new wood chips every few years, 3 to 5 years, 2 years, whatever I'm into. Keep this going or choose to let it rot down.
I'm still gonna see mushrooms for a long time either way.
I'm back in the Sioux with Jason Karstens of True North Guide Service to see firsthand how anglers fish the Cloverland powerhouse for Atlantic salmon. Back in June, we fished for Atlantics out of Detour at the mouth of Lake Huron, and I watched the LSSU fish hatchery stock the river with thousands of fish. Atlantic salmon migrate up the St. Mary's River back to the powerhouse where they were stocked, and July and August are prime time to catch them here. There are 18 fishable chutes on the east side of the plant, and we hooked right onto the powerhouse between a couple chutes. Jason's coworker Peyton joined us to help out on the fish catching.
They just move back and forth through all these tubes, but they can only make it up in there maybe about 20 feet is about as far as they can go. So they're just sitting in here getting fat and staying nice and happy and cool with the water and the current, just staying here until it's time for spawn. So this is a nymph rig. It's not your traditional fly fishing by any means, but it's very effective. And we've got a couple of nymphs on a drop set with a slip bobber because of the deep current. And the whole object is to get it up in there and get it presenting to them for a natural drift. Seems simple enough, right? You can do this with spinning rods, with fly gear as well. You don't have to use a float. The traditional way is not with a float. And they're just kind of suspended in here. We're in about 18, 14 foot of water, depending on the turbine. And these fish are anywhere in the water column, and you just gotta kind of play around with your depths and keep trying. It could be a little 10-inch Atlantic that just got released this year, or it could be a 15-inch whitefish, or it could be a 15-pound Atlantic. You just never know. There's a one-eyed muskie that's been seen by many of people fishing here for years.
Jason taught me his technique for fishing here.
So instead of reeling, we're just hand stripping it in. And the whole thing is I just get that bobber up close to the rod tip, and then I'm just doing a loop, and I'm touching the water and throwing and letting go. And then I'm just pointing my rod at that bobber and just pulling that slack in as it's coming down to me. And I got my line right there on my fingers, so I can just clamp down with my fingers to set the hook if I need to.
It was a little tricky at first, but eventually I got the hang of it. I had one salmon follow, but nothing hit. The fish were being camera shy today. Thankfully, the guys did hook into a few.
Little one. Yeah, it's a small one. Doesn't think he's small though. All right, Peyton, you ready? Little male, he's already starting to get the kite on a front jaw.
Peyton was busy catching this year's stock while I wasn't looking.
So that's this year's release. So when you were up here earlier, and they were about that big, that's what they've grown into already just this year. And really feisty.
Later in the day, the powerhouse filled up with a handful of boats. We watched a few of them battle some silverfish, and I couldn't zoom in far enough, but one guy did get one in the net. This is a truly unique fishing experience only found here in the UP. That's all for tonight, and I hope to see you right back here next week for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.